SJC-12721, Commonwealth versus Omar Bonner.
Okay, Attorney Shaw, when you're ready.
Chief Justice Budd, and may it please the court, my name is Robert Shaw. I'm privileged to appear today on behalf of Omar Bonner. I'd like to begin with the primary sufficiency issue by addressing what the foundational facts are from which one either can or cannot appropriately draw inferences. And that is an exercise that is necessary because, notwithstanding the fact that we have a video that we can all look at, the government has filed a brief with what I assert are significant inaccuracies with respect to what that video shows, to say nothing of what happened subsequently at the Bonner residence, and my intention is to highlight those inaccuracies. So what are the foundational facts? Omar Bonner is one in a group of friends that include Robertson, Watson, and Denton. On December 13th, 2013, they all attend a performance at Kay's Oasis Club in Mattapan. There's nothing in the evidence which indicates anything unusual about Mr. Bonner's decision to attend that performance, nor is there any indication that he was motivated by anything other than the desire to see the artist that was performing. Now, there is among this group of friends the fact of communication by text or calls prior to this performance on the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, and so on, just as there was just about every single day in December and November prior to the performance. These could have been texts, they could have been calls, they could have been group texts that Mr. Bonner was included in, but which he was not paying any attention to. We have no way of knowing because the evidence doesn't indicate that. But there's no indication whatsoever that there is any pattern of communication, that the communication deviated in any way as the performance approached, or that the communication had anything to do with a shooting or the planning of a shooting. Now, Mr. Bonner was photographed at the club. He's dressed in bright red and white Christmas colors. He's got a large scarf, a hat with a pom-pom on it. He's conspicuous. He's standing on the edge of the floor. One of the photos, he's got a big smile on his face. Now, in some of the photos, you can see Robertson, and Robertson is sitting far behind him. He's against a wall, sitting in a chair as far back as one can be, and in a couple of the photos, you can see that Robertson is covering his face with a scarf. But there's no indication that Mr. Bonner was aware of that, and there's no indication that Mr. Bonner understood why that was happening. Now, when the show ends, the victim, who like Bonner attended with a larger group, leaves his car and then leaves to go get his car, and then he returns to the Havelock area. And according to the evidence, Watson, Robertson, and Denton also leave when the show ends. And they get their respective cars. Watson is in an MKX. Denton is in a RAV4. The Commonwealth presented evidence that 3 minutes and 46 seconds before the shooting, the MKX and the RAV4 are recorded going down Havelock Street and turning right on Blue Hill Avenue. Now, when Robertson, Watson, and Denton leave the show, they do so without Omar Bonner. How do you know that? You know that because after a period of time passes, Mr. Bonner is trying to get into contact with Denton, and he calls him, and Denton doesn't answer. He then tries to call Watson. Watson doesn't answer. Now, 3 to 4 minutes after Watson and Denton are recorded driving down Havelock and turning right on Blue Hill Avenue, that's when the victim is recorded on the camera parking his car on Havelock Street. That's when we see the first shooter, allegedly Robertson, running in, firing shots. Then we see the MKX driving up, allegedly Watson, picking him up, driving down Havelock, turning right on Blue Hill Avenue, and leaving. Now, what does the video show at that point? 47 seconds after that first shot is fired by Robertson, The second shooter, allegedly Denton, consistent with his having driven the RAV4 down Havelock and turned right on Blue Hill Avenue and either parked on Blue Hill or parked on Baird Street, which is the next street over, can be seen making his way back on foot. You look in the upper right-hand corner of that video, you're going to see him running across Havelock towards Kay's Oasis. That is at 1:53:43. If you look in the top right-hand corner of the video at 1:53:43. At 1:54:07, having made his way down Havelock, you can see him cutting in between two cars. He then crosses the street, runs toward the back of the victim's car, where he clears his firearm and he shoots. Now, after Denton can be seen running across the top of the video in the top right-hand corner, you can see a large figure who's walking from Kay's Oasis, the opposite side. He turns right on Havelock and he starts walking down. That's at 1:53:49. You have to look at the timestamp at the top of the video. There's the AM, and on the immediate side, the right side of the M, you're going to see this figure at 1:53:49 turning and walking down. You can almost see the dark figure sort of walk down Havelock Street. That is allegedly the fourth person, Bonner, and at some point he steps off the sidewalk and he starts walking toward where Denton is. That's when Denton begins firing. Denton at that point, he's firing down towards the ground and he's firing at the victim.
Excuse me, Mr. Shaw,
Yeah.
and I please go back to what you're doing. But let me ask you this critical question. At the time the shots are fired, where is Mr. Bonner?
And I'm going to get to that right now, Your Honor. That's exactly right. So he begins walking over. I just wanted to point out that when he fires, he's firing towards the ground, and the victim is behind a car.
If you get in there, continue.
Yeah. And so he wouldn't have been the victim would not have been visible to Mr. Bonner at that point. So now, getting to exactly what you're talking about. Throughout the video, Bonner is walking. He's several steps behind Denton. He's not running with him. At timestamp 1:54:05, which is when Denton is first trying to shoot, and then he starts clearing his firearm, Bonner is still on the far sidewalk and he's walking. He's actually behind some parked cars at that point still. Okay?
So he's across the street.
Right. Now, when the first shot actually goes off, Bonner has started walking across the street. He's about midway across the street. And that happens at 1:54:11. Timestamp 1:54:11. And Bonner jumps back at that point. The shots that Denton fires last for 2 seconds, very quick. So as soon as he jumps back, those shots essentially end. And then he continues approaching the car. He walks around the rear of the car. He looks, and in the words of Ian Simpson, who's looking out a window, he just kicks a lifeless body and then runs.
Well, there's a comment, too.
Well, there's the comment, Your Honor, if that could, I think according to the testimony, it's not really clear that Bonner made that comment. But yes, there was
All
that.
right, so give me that in a light most favorable to the Commonwealth. When is the comment made?
Well, there was that comment, and that comment was expressing a negative sentiment toward the victim. That's right. But sticking with the video for just a moment.
Okay, could you?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to come back to that, but.
Okay.
So we've got him either across the street or the middle of the street at the time the shots are fired.
He's not across the street. He's middle of the street.
Okay, we got him at the middle of the street.
Yes.
All right. And then the victim is disabled or deceased, and we have the kick.
Right.
How much time elapses between the shots and the kick?
I think because the entire time Bonner is approaching. So it's a matter of, I don't know, he started clearing his gun at 1:54:05. He's still on the sidewalk. When the first shot goes off, he started crossing the street at that point. He jumps back. Then he continues walking and he looks behind the vehicle. So it's not that much, but he's in the process of approaching during that time.
Okay, and then time frame wise, when is the statement made?
Well, the statement is made according to Simpson, who obviously can't see anybody's mouth, but the statement is made at about the time that the kick occurs.
About the time of the kick?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that's what the video shows, and I just want to point out, it does not depict as the government.
just finish the video, your movie for a little further?
Sure.
Do they then get in a car together and leave?
Well,
And is there evidence that indicates, okay, they were separate, but then they depart together?
well, Denton runs, and then Bonner runs after him after that.
And do they then end up in the same car, or what happens?
Well, and then Denton is driving the car. Bonner is not driving the car, but he gets in the car, and they end up going to the Bonner residence. And mind you, that they went to the show together along with these other individuals.
At the Bonner residence, and explain this to us, does the allegation that the defendant is involved in the cover-up or the concealment of the murder weapon?
There's the allegation that once they're back on his property, he gets out of the car. There is an undercover detective who's dressed in plain clothes, jumps out of a Jeep, not the typical kind of undercover car, and points a gun at him, and he runs. Then
I'm more concerned about the murder weapon, not...
Yes, and the assertion is that when he runs, he then tosses. So the allegation of the government is that he grabbed the weapon to get rid of it, and he tossed it at his house. Now, what's inaccurate about what the government is telling you is that he did not toss that into a yard that's directly across. The firearm is found in 102 Lewison Street, which is a yard which is to the left, okay? And when Denton ran, Denton did not run, as the government tells you, down to Edwardson Street and then go on Edwardson Street. Denton runs across the front of the Bonner house. He turns left. He runs on the property line in between, and you can see through the exhibit, there's his black cap is right there. He runs in between, and then he cuts through some yards, including 102 Lewiston, which takes you directly to 104 Lewiston driveway where he was arrested, and the gun is found in the 102 Lewiston yard. It is not right over from where Bonner ran.
But be that as it may, I mean, in the light most favorable, we have the defendant engaged in concealment of the crime, correct?
The weapon,
Right, the weapon.
similar to the Simpkins
Well,
case. Yes, you could say that.
i.e. the murder weapon.
Yes, you could
and-
say
and
that.
I don't want you to, are you done with your factual?
Well, I just want to point out, to be clear, the video does not depict, as the government says, Bonner casually walking towards the gunman and standing next to him. It doesn't show him standing and looking at the victim during the shooting. The video doesn't show that he remained at the scene when the gun jammed and Denton cleared it and then Denton fired.
We're going to watch, I haven't had
Yeah.
a chance. Of course, we're going to watch the video
Okay.
very
So-
carefully.
Okay.
And whether or not he's standing there, he's at the middle of the street, we're
Right,
going
and-
to be able to see that.
Yeah, and there are other assertions that he got out, he was
So-
trying to
so-
prevent cars and things of
and-
that
and-
sort. Not true.
With respect to our case law, and we have the mere presence cases, and we have, ability to render assistance if needed, that line of cases, where does your case line up when we have, and what are we to do with the kick in the head and the dirty MF statement as evidence ill will towards the victim?
Right. It's expressing a negative sentiment toward the victim. Now, in our case law, and Gonzalez is a great case, where the court said in a very pertinent case that you can infer lethal intent from the defendant's actions, but those actions, by their very nature, must demonstrate lethal intent. We don't have that here. As repulsive or disgusting as it may be to the court that someone would kick somebody who is dead, we don't have that here. That's not lethal intent, okay? You can infer, Gonzalez says this, lethal intent from statements that are made by a defendant. But those statements need to convey the intention to carry out a killing. In the statements where those inferences have been drawn, they are statements of intention. I'm going to kill you. Or statements of planning. I'm going to kill you. We don't have that here. As, again, repulsive as it may be to the court, we have a statement after the fact. Mr. Bonner was never in a position to assist in the killing of this individual.
And as far as drawing the line between accessory after the fact, if we get, your position might be that hiding the murder weapon in the light most favorable gets you to accessory after the fact, but not shared intent or rendering assistance. Where do we draw those lines between helping someone out to fulfill the crime, i.e. get rid of the weapon, and shared intent that the crime occur?
And I think this goes really to what the trial judge did when, I think the court is aware from the record that the trial judge was very troubled about the murder charge against Bonner, given the evidence and his conduct in this case.
What are your best cases, Mr. Shaw, with regard to
Well,
someone,
I think
someone who's convicted of murder but should have been convicted of accessory after the fact?
Yes, well, I think Simpkins is a case that the court should definitely be looking at. Mandel is a case that the court should be looking at. And of course, the recent case of Commonwealth versus Lopez is a very important case to be looking at. These are all cases where there is a group of individuals and there is some sort of assistance and connection to the crime, but insufficient evidence. Now, what the trial judge did here is the trial judge, despite saying she was very troubled by this charge against Bonner, she ended up taking a leap in favor of the government at the end of the case. And she did that relying on Costa, which is nothing like this case, and she did that engaging in circular reasoning. Her reasoning was, well, there was presence, and the presence may have been encouraging, and therefore we have presence and encouragement. That's not what Costa said. Costa said, as some other cases have said, that where there is evidence of an agreement to be present at a killing, the presence may be encouraging. Now, that is very different than saying, well, there's presence, and because there's presence, we can infer an agreement, and because we're inferring an agreement, we can say that the agreement may have been encouraging.
Counsel, let me just ask you about this, because I still look at this and say, you're parsing all of this stuff and looking at it in isolation, and the jury's looking at it as the totality of all of this. You have folks that communicate together in the days and weeks leading up to it, and understand, I get your point that we don't know what the content of those communications were. But you have a situation where the decedent gets 10 shots into him, the car leaves. Now you say Bonner leaves, but somehow you say that he has no idea where his friends are, but yet he comes back to right where the other gentleman, where Denton is, right? He leaves and he knows to go down to, or at least maybe not knows, but the evidence is he leaves the club and goes to where Denton just happens to be, who he didn't have any contact with, right? So then he's in the middle of the street. There are more shots from Denton. He's there in the middle of the street. He says dirty MF and kicks the victim. Why is it unreasonable for the jury to infer a shared intent? I mean, quite clearly, if somebody says dirty MF, it doesn't seem to suggest that this is certainly a random person that he just happens upon that he doesn't recognize. I mean, isn't that a reasonable inference? Okay,
Your Honor, thank you, and there's some misunderstanding there, so I want to address it. Beginning first with the communication. I understand your point. Again, is someone going to suggest that on November 15th, when there was communication that somehow that was planning a murder at a nightclub, when someone happened to pull their car when a show ended up on Havelock Street, that was somehow, that's an unreasonable inference. I don't think there's a basis to draw that inference. Now, with respect to the location...
But I guess that's what I'm getting at. Maybe as an advocate you might say that, but doesn't the jury have the right, and weren't they presented with that argument and they rejected it?
No, I think that that's utter speculation, and I don't think that there are any other cases. There is content that is focused on when an inference like that is drawn, and here we certainly don't have that kind of content to say that a month before somehow this concerned a murder. Now, in terms of the location, Your Honor, this is very important. There is Havelock Street and Blue Hill Avenue. Kay's Oasis is right here on the corner, okay? When Watson, Denson, and Robertson leave without Bonner, okay, they leave, Bonner's still there, he's calling them, okay? Robertson does these first shots right here on Havelock, okay? And then they take off. Now, Bonner is here at the club. He's right there on the corner. Then we have Denton running down here and running down Havelock. Bonner then starts following. Now, did Bonner come out immediately when there were gunshots? No. Could you infer that he saw Denton running down and then he started following? But why is he at that location? This is very important. He's at the location because he saw the performance. He's not at some isolated location where he went with this group of people and therefore he is present and has proximity. He is present and has proximity because he was at the show.
I think you're misinterpreting what I'm saying.
Okay.
How does he end up being where Denton happens to be?
Because the door to Kay's Oasis is right on the corner. The shooting is happening right down the street. So he's right here. And that's what you will see at that timestamp I told you. He walks from Kay's Oasis and he turns on Havelock and walks down. That's why he's there.
Sure,
Now-
but I'm saying that to the extent that you happen to see that it's not an exciting event, that he runs down, that his friend or his associate might be in some peril, he's walking. The video says he's walking.
Yes.
I'm saying, why isn't it a reasonable inference for the jury, in the light most favorable to the Commonwealth, to infer that there's a shared intent there because of this entire picture that's in front of them?
And that's my point. This entire picture undermines that. The fact that he's separated, the fact that he's coming from a location. Why is he there at that point in time? Because the club's right there, and he could have seen Watson take off and leave and wondered, why are you leaving? He could have seen Denton run down and then started walking. Now, there's no indication when this happens that Denton is under distress. He wouldn't have thought, oh, Denton's under distress if he sees Denton in the road and he starts walking over. So there wouldn't have been a reason for him to necessarily not do that. But the point being, Your Honor, I think, which is very important, is that Bonner is never in a position to contribute to anything, and that's important. Bonner is never in a position to contribute to the killing. He doesn't put himself in a position to assist. He doesn't act as a lookout. This is all unfolding. It's in motion, and he comes at the tail end of this, and he does something stupid at the end. But the question is that enough for first-degree murder? Is it enough to convict him and put him in prison for life for first-degree murder? And I'm suggesting to the court that it's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Jordan.
Good morning, may it please the court. Darcy Jordan on behalf of Commonwealth, and with me via Zoom is the trial prosecutor, Ian Pollenbaum. We're asking the court to affirm the double execution of Romeo McCubbin. If I could first turn to the video, the actual timestamp on the video is actually not correct. The owner of the video system, Ian Simpson, he testified to such. It was a home video camera that he was using for his own personal surveillance. And I'll turn to volume 4, page 95 and 102, where Mr. Simpson explains that the timestamp is not accurate, reliable. So the way that the Commonwealth figures out the time of the murders is by using ShotSpotter. And at trial, the Commonwealth was able to introduce, with the help of John Green from our forensics media department, superimpose the sound over the video. So the jury did have the ability to hear the shots and watch the murder happen. So all those times that my brother just used to be comparative to the phone records, and again, there's nothing to dispute that the phone records are accurate, or incorrect. So I just think if he's in this court is really looking to how he represented the time, I would suggest looking at the video and understanding that those timings are incorrect. So if I can turn to I think the court really has it right. In the light most favorable of the Commonwealth, the cumulative of all of this testimony, before, during, and after, invokes that this defendant played an integral role in the murder of Mr. McCubbin. I think by parsing out this one isolated kick, I think is not only not fair to the light most favorable of the Commonwealth, but also not.
Can I ask you about your brief and your argument? You make a lot out of the non-action that he didn't intercede to help the victim. That's never been part of our case law, correct?
Well, of course, there's no duty to act, I think is what
Right,
Your Honor is
right.
getting to. Of course, there's no
But
duty to act.
I don't see how that cuts against someone if they don't, if they fail to intercede.
Well, I think the purpose of highlighting that evidence was more that in my brother's brief, he's describing that Denton is a hapless bystander that happens upon this. So I think it was more in contrast to the idea that he doesn't know what's going on. It's not as if someone comes upon their friend shooting someone in the head and doesn't either run away. It's contrary to human nature. Run away or even freeze. He doesn't even freeze because we know as Denton is shooting the final shot, Bonner is actually descending upon the victim. I think Justice Keffer was asking what the timing is of the kick. It's as if Denton is firing basically the last shot, and contemporaneously, Bonner is going to kick him. So it's happening at the same time.
But it doesn't help your argument to argue something that's legally not significant.
I thought it was factually.
The focus has to be on what did the defendant do, correct?
I think it was more a factual contrast to the fact that you cannot infer that he didn't know what was going on based on the fact that he's standing there watching his friend. So I don't disagree with you that perhaps the legal conclusion on that slight, I agree with you that there's no duty for Bonner to act in that moment, but it's more to provide context so this wasn't somebody that just happened upon somebody getting shot in the head and was just standing there. So I agree with you. I think no legal conclusion based on, again, that slight piece of evidence. However, in the whole context, I think it's illustrative of what the defendant's mental state was. Because, of course, we don't have direct evidence of his mental state, but I think their inferences can be made based on those facts. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Do you have a first-degree murder conviction without the kick? Is the kick is the kick critical here?
I think we still would have a first degree. Obviously, the kick helps, but I think the fact that he's kicking and saying those words is almost an exclamation point. So if we take away the kick, I think it's really hard to say because what he does next is the kick. So if his just presence was there, obviously we'd have a harder case.
I'm just trying to, when I read Mr. Shaw's brief, he says it's a light kick. You say I haven't seen the video yet.
Of course, you'll see the video, and it is not a light kick. Actually, part of the Commonwealth's case is that that Bonner almost winds up to kick because he uses a counterbalance of, I think it's his left hand as he kicks with his right, and you see the glimmer of his ring, which is depicted in the photos from the event, and his mother testifies that she can no longer find his ring thereafter being arrested. So it's a strong enough kick that it requires him a counterbalance.
I'm just trying to get a sense of this case without the kick, because, and he's, there's no one suggesting that the kick caused the death. I mean, you know, I take it there's an argument he's just happy to see the guy dead, right? You know, take that, glad that happened to you, you know.
Well, I think if anything, the kick is more his part in the murder. And I think I cite some of the cases like Longo that say the continuation after the event. It's almost like here it's like the exclamation point to the murder. Like, I'm here, I'm a part of this murder. I intend this man to be harmed. I intend him to be dead. Based on that, on the words and seeing him being shot in the head. And the Commonwealth's case is that he knows that Robertson has already shot him. So the way...
And can I ask, the big picture, again, I haven't read this whole transcript, which is a lot. Is there going to be some explanation of some bad blood between the victim and these four guys, or is that nothing? We're going to have none of that?
You're going to have none of that, Your Honor.
Okay.
If there are any other questions about the deficiency, I think the Commonwealth does think that the video in itself, it will definitely help this court to understand the events. The ID of the defendant as the second, as the kicker is corroborated through other evidence, other photos of the.
Where do you say the defendant is positioned at the time of the shooting?
The defendant, where I say I'm sorry, Your Honor, where the defendant is positioned, I know, at the time of the shooting.
Yes.
At the time of the shooting, and I think it's almost elongated because there are 3 shots, but it's elongated because Denton's gun jams. So if you watch the video, Denton comes out first from the cars across the street and kind of lines up behind the McCubbin's car, and McCubbin's on the sidewalk, so is on the other side of the car, and he lines up and fires, and obviously you don't hear the jam, but you see manipulation of the gun. At that point, Denton is behind him, is behind Bonner, and I would argue it was a clear view of seeing McCubbin on the ground. He's standing there, it jams. Bonner still is standing there.
Okay, so we're going to have to obviously watch the video. Your position is they're standing next to each other. Mr. Shaw tells us one's in the middle of the street and one's not. But we'll watch the video and decide for ourselves.
Of course, you can watch the video, and the video is there's cars parked on both sides, and there's one lane of traffic available. So I don't dispute that the defendant's in the middle of the street, and he kind of is. And part of the Commonwealth's argument is that he's standing in the middle of the street, so no cars can come by to disrupt Mr. Denton shooting Mr. McCubbin as he lie dying on the ground. So, but I think that the meaningfulness is the gun gets jammed, and he's shooting 1, 2, 3, but simultaneous. It's almost like the last shot, the defendant goes and kicks him. It's at the same. It's not the same. It's almost like the shot's not over as Bonner comes and kicks him. And actually, as Bonner's kicking him, Denton's leaving, and then Bonner follows him behind. And then we also have eyewitness.
And where do they meet up? Where's the RAV4? I'm confused.
Sure.
So because
We don't know exactly where I think your question was earlier, where was it? It's not on the surveillance. We can't see it, the RAV4 on the surveillance. What we do know is that
they come to this nightclub in the RAV4. Do we know that Denton and Bonner we know that, right?
do we know if they arrived at the Cay's Oasis event?
I'm just trying to figure, I mean, you need to connect Denton and Bonner as being sort of acting together.
Sure.
And I'm just trying, and the car is, and they leave together in the car, they end up in the same place in the car. Do they arrive in the car?
We don't know that. We do know, what we know is that they're in photos at the event together.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, if Bonner and Denton left at the same time from the club. We don't know. What we do know is that the first time we do know is that 4 minutes before the murder,
Mm-hmm.
that a car consistent with the RAV4, which we argue is the RAV4, and the RAV4 is the defendant's sister's car.
Right, I get it.
We see that drive past McCubbin's car 4 minutes before the murder, and it's actually following a Lincoln MRX, which is the same as Watson. So the Commonwealth argues that, in the light most favorable, that they're conducting surveillance.
But Bonner, the defendant, is not in that car then, because he's still at the club, or?
No, we don't know. We don't know who's exactly in the car. So we don't know, we don't know who's necessarily driving it. I think an inference, and the Commonwealth says that there could be an inference that Denton was driving that car, because then, actually, we don't really know, because at 1:42, which is when the Commonwealth thinks that they're driving around, that Bonner calls Denton. So perhaps one of them was driving the car the 4 minutes before the murder, and then parked the car, and then was communicating where the car is parked. We don't really know. That's conjecture at this point.
Can I ask
but-
one last question?
Sure.
How far is the nightclub from where Denton and Bonner where at least Denton shoots and then Bonner kicks? How far is that distance?
It's not far at all. The Cay's Oasis is on, let's see, if I'm McCubbin's car, I'm parked facing this way. Cay's Oasis is on the left-hand corner, and I don't see on the video, I think you can see the building actually in the surveillance video of Cay's Oasis. It doesn't have it's the side of the building.
Is that 50 yards or 25 yards or 200 yards? I'm just trying to get a sense of the difference? We
It's
don't-
close. I'm very
Close
bad
is-
at distances.
Okay, close is not helpful. Okay.
It's close. You can see it on the surveillance. So you see them, basically, Denton and Bonner go on the side of that building. So it's close. But if I could just turn back to the RAV4 again, because we have that, we also have evidence that Mr. Ishmael sees somebody running from Haverhill after being, this kick, somebody wearing red and black, which is consistent with the defendant's clothing, running on Havelock to Blue Hill. And then where the RAV4 is kind of, if you will, picked up again, is when the detective sees the RAV4 fleeing from the area. And then that RAV4 ends up in the Bonner's driveway. So I think what you're trying to get at is, it is lost, if you will. The RAV4 is lost there for a few minutes, but is picked up right again, or basically around the block on Baird Street, which is perpendicular to Havelock Street.
Can I ask what Mr. Shaw says? It's just as likely that Denton threw the gun into that yard as the defendant. What's your response to that?
Well, I think in the light most favorable of the Commonwealth, that's not how the testimony came out.
Was the testimony undisputed that Denton runs by this spot too, or no?
I think it's not. I think it's not, because if there's maps, obviously, that this court will have available to them, it's my understanding that it was a block, with houses on both sides with shared backyards, and that Denton runs out of the Bonner yard and does go. I don't dispute that he goes through yards, but there's two officers. There's one officer chasing him through the yards, and there's one officer basically parallel on the sidewalk. And so once he gets to 102 Lewiston Street, where the gun is found, the testimony is that he came out on the sidewalk. So if you will, the sidewalk officer almost is picking up the chase there, and then Denton makes the sharp left into the neighboring yard of 104 and is underneath the car in that driveway. So the Commonwealth contends that that evidence would dispute that that Denton was actually in the backyard of 102, that he would be in the front yard of 102 passing that, and then went directly, again, underneath the car there. So, and the officer saw him do that.
And I can't remember, is there a third gun found in this, or?
There was, there's two guns. The other gun that was found is a .25 that was found near where Denton got out of the car in the Bonner driveway, and that was not admissible, or no discussion about that in the second trial. And that was not tied to the murder in any way as well. If I can just turn to the last argument, which has to do with whether or not the defendant was wrongly precluded from talking about the 38 being not Bonner's. I just want to turn, if we look at the transcript and what the judge actually ordered, it was very discreet. The judge ordered the defendant that he couldn't affirmatively say that the defendant didn't possess the 38. But she didn't preclude him from arguing other inferences based on the evidence. So even if there was an error, if you will, which the Commonwealth does not concede, does think that he was properly stopped from arguing it, that there really was no prejudice, because he still argued, my client didn't throw the gun, my client was never seen with the gun, there's a lying detective that's giving you the corroborating evidence about the thud. So again, I think I explained why that direct estoppel was appropriately applicable here, but even so, there would be no prejudice, because he wasn't prevented from making the same argument.
Okay,
Seeing no other questions, rest in our brief. Thank you.
thank you.